Hey guys, so today we're going to start putting a 3-inch lift on this Crown Vic. As you can see, I got it set on double jack stands there. First thing we got to do, get those brakes out of the way. Then we'll go in from there. As you can see, I've lubed down a lot of the bolts already. We're going to be changing that sway bar bushing there. Get all these new pieces on here. First thing we got to do though is get those brakes out of the way. Okay, so as you can see, there's a wire here I ran through that inner fender, and we're going to go ahead and hang that caliper off of it so it's out of the way. There was already a bunch of little holes up there, so don't think I just drilled a hole just for that wire. Okay, so there are two bolts to take this caliper off. There's one down here and there's one up here. They're an 18 millimeter. So let's go ahead and get these taken off of here. I know, why is he using a boxed end wrench? Well, turns out I don't have an 18 millimeter socket. So this is going to take a minute, so I'll go ahead and come back when I got these bolts out. Alright, I have the calipers ready to come off. We're going to go ahead and thread this wire in through here. That way when I pull the caliper, I got something for it to hang on. Let me go ahead and set this up and we'll get to it. Okay, so here we go. I still have the bolts in, but they're ready to come out. I'll go ahead and get this one out. And we'll go ahead and work this top one out. It looks like it still needs some love. Okay, we got that out. Now, we'll go ahead and pull this. Alright guys, so what we gotta do is we gotta take that bolt off, that bolt there off, and split that ball joint right there after we take that nut off. That will remove the upper control arm. Then down here we have the lower sway bar link bolt there, and the other one is right there. That'll take off that lower sway bar, or excuse me, that sway bar link. Down here underneath we have another bolt. That's the bolt to the lower ball joint. Then we'd have to split that ball joint. Right here we have another nut. This is to your tie rod end. We got to take that off and then split that tie rod end out. But before you get started on any of this, I almost forgot, we also have this big dude right here. That's your lower strut bolt. Before you get started on any of that, make a plan on what you're going to do with your spindle once it's off. Don't forget to do these. This is from your ABS system. So you want to make sure to take those off first. That way this line can move it around a little. If you take this off, and this off, this off, and this off, you should be able to lay your spindle right down on the ground beside you. If not, we'll have to get a wire, hook it to something, and hang the spindle just like we did the brake cable. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and start taking these bolts and nuts off, and I will get back to you when we get a little closer. Alright, I got all the nuts off. I got that brake line up there loose. I should be able to set that spindle right down on that tire there. Next thing I got to do, I got to finish taking that bottom of that strut off. These here bolts are kind of funny up here. They're flat on the back, so I'm not sure if I can get those completely out until I get the strut off. So let me go ahead and get this ball joint split apart and get this spindle out of our way. Alright, I got the spindle off, and just like I thought, I set it right over here on the dead tire. Now I got to push the bottom out and try to get these bolts out up here to get that upper control arm off. And then we'll work on that ball joint. Alright, so it is just what I thought it was. These bolts will not come out with that strut still in place. So I went ahead and unbolted the top of it, and now we'll push it down with my foot while I pull those bolts out, and then the upper control arm will come off. Alright, let's get this done. Well, that went a lot easier than I expected. I just pushed down on that and the whole strut fell out in my hand. So now we can take these bolts out. And then we should be able to pull that upper control arm right off. Throw it over there. It's not needed anymore. We got a new one. Next, lower ball joint, outer tie rod in. Alright, let me get that ball joint stuff set up and I'll be back. Alright, I got my ball joint press out, the appropriate receiver cup and press bracket. One thing, don't forget, there's a C-clip right here. Goes all the way around that ball joint. That ball joint will not come out if you don't take that off. Don't necessarily throw it away. Sometimes new ball joints, they forget to put it in. Alright, so I'm going to go ahead, take that clip off, get this press set up, and then we'll press this ball joint out. You got the press all set up. What you do is you turn this bolt here, goes down, it threads through here, pushes on your ball joint, which falls out into your collector cup. You can turn this with a wrench, you can turn it with a socket, doubt you can turn it with your hand, but I think I'm going to use air. Alright, I will get this pressed out and I'll show you when I'm done. Okay, well, it looked like I had the wrong size receiver cup on there. As soon as I put a bigger one on, out she comes. And now, we put the new one in. We're ready to push that ball joint in. I got the pusher set up on the ball joint with the receiver cap there. Let's push it in. Okay, clip is on. Ball joint is in place. It is set. One step closer. Alright, I went ahead and mounted the lift plate on the top of the strut. And as you can see, there's no possible way I'll get a bolt through there to hold the strut on the top. So I'm going to go ahead and grab my angle grinder and take part of those bolts off right there. Okay, I got those Loctited on there, and I got the bolt cut off, so now I should be able to get a bolt in there for the top. Went ahead and put the bolt through the bottom, and I put it in there. But what I forgot was those two bolts. These will not fit behind there with that in place. So, time for some fancy footwork, I guess. Okay, just a quick update. I had to take that bolt out down there on the bottom of the strut in order to move the strut around to get the upper control arm in place to get these two bolts in. But they're in place. Now I just got to move it around and get it all working. I'm going to go ahead and bolt the top of the strut in, and then I'll work on the bottom of it. And then we'll put the spindle back. I got the top of that strut bolted in. I think it would be easier to bolt the lift into the mount first and then bolt the strut to the mount, because you can still get to these bolts after you have the mount in there. There's my helper, more of a hindrance than help. Alright, so my next step, I'm going to set up and get this tie rod in changed. When doing the tie rod in, make sure this nut right here does not move. You can unscrew your tie rod in from the shaft. If you don't move this nut, when you put your new tie rod on, it should be in the exact same spot. So let's go ahead and give that a try. I got the tie rod in broke loose. What I did is I put a wrench right here on this shaft, and then I put a wrench right here on this flat spot of the tie rod. Hi, kitty kitty. And then I broke the tie rod loose. As you can see, it's loose. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to spin this one off, and I'm going to put the new one on. Alright, I got it screwed all the way on there, up to the nut there. So this time I'm going to hold the nut with this wrench, and I'm going to tighten it on with this. That way that nut does not move. I got her on there. She's good and tight now. I got it all tightened up against the nut. The nut did not move. Next, we got to get the bottom of the strut into the control arm and get that bolt in there. That's a lot easier said than done, because it's not exactly straight. So you'll have to put something in there, turn it a little bit, push down on your control arm until it starts up on this, then pull your rod out and push it the rest of the way down in there. Should be fun. I got that strut bolted in now. I got the nut on, good and tight. The top is all bolted in. Next thing I'm going to do is this lower control arm bushing. It's got a little bit of play in it, so we're going to replace that one like we did on the other side. Changing the control arm bushing really isn't that tough. You just got two bolts, one on each side of the bracket here. So we'll take the bolts off, drop the bracket, take the old rubber out, put the new one in, and then we'll get the jack and we'll push the control arm back up so the bracket fits back on there easy. I went ahead and took those nuts off and that bracket that goes around the bushing. This here bushing right here. There's no cut in it for me to get it off there real easy, so I'll have to cut this one off. This one's got a cut in it, so it'll go on pretty easy. We'll get those replaced, get that lifted back into place, get those bolts and brackets put back on. I went ahead and cut this one here. Now I can get it off there. I'm going to give you a little tip on how to do that. I used my PVC pipe cutters. Worked real easy, real quick. Now let's get it put back together. Alright. I got that bushing in now. Got the nuts back on the bolt. Good and tight. She's ready to go. Now we got to get the spindle on. But the first thing I got to do, I got to get this sway bar end link off of here. The bolt's right there. Got the new one for it. So we'll get that off of there, then we'll get that spindle on. I went ahead and I bolted the spindle to the lower control arm, and I got the nut on it. As you can see, it's not tight. I put the jack up under the lower control arm so I can jack the control arm up so the top of the spindle meets the top ball joint. Let's get that done. As you can see, I got the jack up, the control arms up. I still got lots of space here on the lower ball joint, but we've closed the gap up here on the top. So let's go ahead and get this top one in. We'll lift it up, we'll get the bolt through, get the nut on, so at least it's in place. And then we'll go ahead and tighten it up. Got the spindle on. I went ahead and I put the nuts on to both ball joints. And I put the nuts on the upper control arm bolts. I have not tightened them all down yet because I want to keep it loose till it's all put together, and then I'll tighten it all up at once. Well, I went ahead and I put the sway bar end link on, and I got the tie rod started. So now I'll start getting everything tightened up. Get the brakes back on it. Get the wheel on it. Put it on the ground. Alright, I tightened everything up. Ball joint nuts are all tight. Tie rod end nut is tight. Upper control arm bolts are tight. Sway bar end link is tight. Looks like all I have left to do is put the brakes on it. Got the rotor back on. I got to get the caliper back on. When I took it off, I pressed on the pistons a little bit, so hopefully it slides back on pretty easily. Get that on, get it bolted up. Okay, everything's put back together. Everything's tight. Same 2 bolts you took out. Put the brakes back on. That went back together nice and easy. All nuts are tight. Brake line is secure. Other brake line is not kinked. Okay. Let's get it off the ground a little further and get that tire on. Okay, there we go. Wheel is on. Sitting on the ground. I don't have much space in there, but I got enough, I think. Now, I gotta do the back. Keep on trucking.